going to do, and I said, well, I don't know, because I've never rode it before. So she said, here, try some of these worms. So I sat next to this person, and I hooked and hooked for a while. She said, well, you're doing really well. I said, well, thank you. So we broke for coffee at 2 o'clock, 2:30, and the ladies in the kitchen said, well, do you know who that lady is next to you? I said, oh, I know who she is. And she said, well, that's Doris Eaton. And I said, is that supposed to mean something? She said, well, she's a well-known rug hooker. And I said, oh. So I said, well, I guess I couldn't have learned from anyone better than Doris Eaton. And she was a regular at Trinity for many years. And she's just a lovely person. And I'm sure we all have stories we could tell about Doris Eaton, and these are the memories that we have of her that's going to last a lifetime. So if Doris Wenzel would like to come up, and she's going to tell us some things about Doris Eaton maybe we didn't know. Yes, you can.
I'm sure most of us would have stories about Doris Eaton because if we're all hookers, she was a very important part of our lives. I met her in 1975. Some of you probably weren't even born then. I was living in Dartmouth, and I took, every year I took continuing education courses.
Turn the thermostat down.
Schools, probably just to get away from children at home. And this year, when I went in 1975, the class I was going to take, which I don't even remember what it was full. And so there was somebody there going to teach rug hooking. And I had tried it several years before because I spent some time in Petit Revere. We had a summer place there, and the people there did rug hooking on old, very flimsy burlap, but it was their winter pastime. And they tore, this one particular friend showed me how to tear the strips in half and turn the edges in. And my husband built me a frame to fold up a big thing like this. He must have had a picture somewhere. Anyway, let me tell you, there were no cutters in those days that I knew of. And I certainly that didn't take. It was too much trouble. But seeing what Doris had on her table looked quite different than what Mrs. Ambrose was hooking in the tea there. And so I thought, well, this looks like painting with wool, and I think I'll give it a try. And that's when it all started. And I never looked back. I tried many, many crafts, but that's the one that's I really got hooked. I really got hooked on that. Of course, Doris was a real artist. She did training for the Massachusetts School of Arts in Boston, and painted. I don't see any of her paintings here. Is there one? Yes, over in the corner. And she just interpreted her painting skills into wool. Edith Withrow, who's part of the Nova Scotia Arts and Crafts Society, I think maybe introduced Doris to hooking, and so I'm sure she went far beyond Edith Withrow ever did. So Doris continued teaching in Dartmouth and continuing ed for years. We started out, I can't remember where we started the very first classes, but later on we hooked in the Quaker House, which is part of the Dartmouth Heritage Museum. And I was involved with the museum, and so it was a great place to hook. It had lots of history because I don't know whether the Quakers hooked, but certainly people in Dartmouth did. Doris continued to come teach in Dartmouth for several years. By the time she was teaching there, she and Ron had moved to Blockhouse, and she drove in at least once a week, every week, to teach rug hooking, and that gets to be a chore after a while, especially in the winter, and so she decided after 7 years that she wasn't going to be doing it anymore. And my oldest daughter taught gourmet hooking at the continuing ed, and she said, "Oh, Mom can teach that." I've been hooking for 4 years. Let me tell you, I learned an awful lot when I started teaching rug hooking. But, and we taught in, we had to find a classroom in a school somewhere. Sometimes it was at night, and we could use the labs, but my first classes were in the basement of Woodlawn School, where my children went to school. And it was a really basement in an old school. If you remember what basements of old schools look like, probably nobody does. I was showing them how to over dye with onion skins. And so I took a slow cooker, and the only plug in the basement, there were no classrooms down there, but the kids could go down at recess and lunchtime. There were no plugs in the room that we had, so I had to plug it into the hall. And I put the onion skins on and let them cook all morning, so there would be nice colors there for them to be able to show them how to over dye. And when the kids came down for lunch, for recess at noon, during the morning, something smells good down here. Anyway, in 1979, Doris got together with a group of like-minded people, hookers, drug hookers, in New Ross, and that was the beginning of the Nova Scotia Rug Hooking Guild. I wasn't there for that first meeting, but I joined immediately afterwards. But one of the people who was there, and this I'll give to you, Anne-Marie, when we're finished, I just found in a file in my filing case today, was Irma Richards, who lived in Petit Revere, and she was one of the founding members of the Guild. And when I saw her after they'd had this meeting, she said, "Doris, why weren't you there?" And I said, "Well, I didn't know about it, or I would have been." Anyway, I joined the next year, and then we began our rug schools, and nobody's ever looked back since then. I don't know whether Doris, we all have lots of good stories to tell, and I'm sure we'll be passing them around later on. The Guild was very successful. We had a large group in Halifax, in Dartmouth even then. Not a large group, we could meet at people's houses, but we did have a regional director. And so I did get involved with the executive, with the Guild, and that way you get to know what's going on in the hooking world, and it's so important to take part in these organizations if you have the opportunity. There are lots more stories, and I can't think of them off the top of my head, but our first rug school, of course, was at University of St. Anne, and we couldn't raise enough money. We didn't have enough money in the Guild by that time, and that was only a year after the Guild had started, to pay for the classes and things, and we had to hire all the teachers from Ontario because, aside from Doris, and Doris didn't teach at that school, I don't think, there were really nobody knew how to teach rug hooking, who knew how to hook, including me, who'd been doing it at continuing ed. Anyway, the president of the Guild went to the provincial government, asked for a loan. I don't remember now how much it was, but Anne-Marie would have all that information. And they gave us the money to start that first rug school. And we made enough money to pay back the loan, and let me tell you, the government was very surprised. And so we've gone on to much larger rug schools now, with people coming from all over the world and with our own local teachers, because the local, we had a teacher branch formed, and we're able to train our own teachers, teach them how to teach, not how to hook, which is important. And so, I don't know whether Doris ever dreamt that in her wildest dreams that this would, the rug hooking she started in Nova Scotia in 1975 or before would come to the way it is. But anyway, thank you very much, Doris.
I'm Peter Barks, and I've been told that I can introduce myself very well. I'm not a rapper, but my wife is. My wife Myra took one of the first courses that Doris was offering in the 70s, and Myra and I and Ron and Doris became good friends, and the friendship extended way beyond rug hooking. They lived up in Petite for quite a while, Provincetown, I guess, and we would go up and Ron would have some berries if they were in season and eggs for us, and we'd sit around the kitchen table while Doris had a little chat with us and served us homemade cookies. So Myra's continues to hook, and between her and friends hooking rug hookers, I heard often that Doris should be nominated for the Order of Nova Scotia. In fact, Janet Barkhouse submitted her name as a nomination 3 times in 3 years, and another rug hooker, Mary Brown, also nominated Doris in 2 other years. All 5 of those nominations were turned down. A few years after all this talk that she should be nominated, a few years before she died, I spent between 2 and 3 months sticking together another nomination. And I submitted her name for the Order of Nova Scotia on 2 separate occasions, 2 separate years, and I also nominated her for the Order of Canada. When I said I stuck things together, I mean exactly that. For weeks, I was surrounded by scrapbooks full of newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, lists of honors Doris had received, and more. Because of the generous help I had from Janet and Mary, members of Doris's family, and many friends of Doris, I had a lifetime of information to stick together. Special thanks to Myra, who encouraged me to do this project, and who was my best critic and proofreader. So this was not my project. It was a project of many people who knew and loved Doris. However, like Janet and Mary's nominations, mine was turned down by the adjudicators of both the Order of Nova Scotia and the Order of Canada. But I would like to read the main part of my nomination. Doris Emily Eaton was born in Boston to Canadian parents in 1928. She grew up in a small New England town. Whenever I say quote, I'm quoting Doris. She grew up in a small New England town, quote, amidst fields lined with lichen-covered stone walls with ponds where we fished and caught pollywogs. Although there were no artists in her family, she had a natural talent in the arts that was recognized and encouraged by her teachers and parents. As a young girl, she was allowed to make an hour-and-a-half trip by bus and streetcar to the Massachusetts School of Art to take Saturday classes in drawing and painting. After she graduated from high school, she was accepted as a full-time student at the Massachusetts School of Art. It is a mark of her determined talent that she was accepted. Quote, "It wasn't easy to get in because the boys were coming back from the war and they were given priority," she said in the book. Every summer, she and her siblings, 3 sisters and a brother, traveled to Canning, Nova Scotia to visit their grandmother. Paish, and unless is that the correct pronunciation, Paish? Her full name was Patience Harding, but we'll call her Paish, or as she was known to the children, Paish. Paish hooked rugs during the winter months that were used to keep out drafts around doors and the, quote, wide cracks in the floorboards. Each summer, Doris brought her grandmother a collection of cloth scraps and a stamped rug pattern from the Boston States. The following summer, there would be a new rug on Pacia's floor. Doris was both mystified and enchanted by the appearance of a new rug every summer. Pacia was reluctant to show Doris how to hook, but, quote, when I was old enough to hold scissors, she let me hook just a little square. The seed had been planted. One summer, Doris arrived in Canning to find that her grandmother had traded all her rugs to an upper Canadian scoundrel for new linoleum floor covering. Doris was devastated. After completing 2 years at the Massachusetts School of Art, Doris moved to Canning in 1948 to be the primary caregiver for Paige, who had fallen ill and required round-the-clock care. Doris was 22. While living in Canning, she met Ron Eaton, a local farmer. They were married in 1950 and had 5 children in 8 years. Quote, the next 10 years on the farm were very busy, washing diapers, cooking meals, milking cows, picking apples, and harvesting and preserving for the winter, washing more diapers. I loved it all. However, she missed time for herself, her drawing and painting. She had just begun to do a little rug hooking. Not long into the marriage, she did something that was, quote, a very new thing for a woman at the time. She had Ron's full support. Every Wednesday was designated as My Wednesday, a day when the children entertained themselves, friends were warned not to call, and Ron cooked meals. Quote, My Wednesday saved my life and kept me on track with my artistic endeavors. That day, for herself, became a tradition she and Ron faithfully kept throughout their marriage of 69 years. Doris concentrated on painting during the first years of her art career. She was an active member of the Canning Group of Artists and studied oil painting under Ian James and printmaking under Doris Larson, who both taught at Acadia University. Her oil paintings were large abstract works that were shown in galleries in Newfoundland, Halifax, and the Beaver Brook Gallery in Fredericton, New Brunswick. But even as her reputation as a painter grew, she was drawn to rug hooking. Edna Withrow, an accomplished rug hooker, had recently moved to nearby Wolfville. One evening in 1961, at Doris's invitation, she brought her finest rugs along and demonstrated rug hooking at Canning's Women's Institute. That evening, quote, brought back a flood of memories and solved the mysteries of how my grandmother's rugs were made. Immediately after Edna's workshop, Doris and 5 other women chipped in to buy a device that cuts discarded wool clothing into strips suitable for hooking. Almost overnight, Doris decided that even though she loved painting and the other forms of art that she had mastered, rug hooking was to be the, quote, medium of my artistic expression that transcended all others. Further study with Edna Withrow opened up a whole new world for those of us who remembered rug hooking from childhood. She discovered that much of what she learned as a painter could be incorporated into rug hooking. Rugs from her grandmother's era served a practical purpose, keeping out drafts. Wool strips were hooked into simple commercial patterns, stamped on burlap. The same pattern might be hooked in different colors, but beyond that, there was not much creativity. The newer, brighter rugs were placed in the parlor, and as they aged, they would be moved to the kitchen, and finally to the back entry where muddy boots eventually ended their usefulness. These rugs were often seen as a sign of poverty, a sign that the household could not afford commercial floor coverings. In contrast, Edna Withrow's rugs were the finest workmanship with subtle shadings and were like exquisite tapestries. They were pieces of art, Doris said. Doris quickly embraced rug hooking, quote, with a passion that would last a lifetime. Edna Withrow showed her how to dye perfectly graduated swatches to shade flowers and fruits, and how to overdye found material for unusual, subtle effects. And in an effort to learn as much as she could, she enrolled in hooking workshops as far away as Decorah, Iowa, and Limerick, Maine. She found other classes in Ontario, Cape Breton, and closer to her home in Church Point and Truro, Nova Scotia. After almost 10 years of learning what she could from other rug hookers, after close to 10 years of exploring some of the, quote, almost limitless possibilities of color, texture, and design in her own rugs, Doris decided that she had enough knowledge to teach rug hooking. She was not a reclusive artist struggling with her art in isolation. Quite the opposite. Anyone who knows Doris knows that when she started to teach in 1970, her first interest was to share her enthusiasm and skills, to inspire others. Over the years, hundreds of students embraced her encouraging words and went on to become artists in their own right. Some started businesses dedicated to rug hookers. Although Doris was a very modest woman, she always understood that her role in our culture extended beyond making her own art. She was too unassuming to claim the title, but she was the most important driving force, a true pioneer in reviving rug hooking and transforming it into art. Quote, in 1 year alone, I taught 150 people how to hook. I hope I'm making a difference, she said in an interview with a newspaper reporter. The fact that in 2002 she was selected to exhibit her rugs and share her skills over a 10-day period at the International Exhibition of Hooked Rugs at the Yomasaki Art Gallery in Tokyo, Japan, was both a testimony to Doris's creativity and a recognition of the difference she was making in raising rug hooking to the level of art. Her generosity of spirit that made such a difference in so many lives is perhaps best illustrated by her volunteer work at Bridgewater's The Ark, a workshop for the specially challenged. In 1994, she was asked to give a demonstration on how to braid rugs. David Jodry, manager of The Ark, said, she stayed on for well over a decade as a volunteer, teaching braiding rugs and rug hooking to our clients. She came in once or twice a week to bring supplies and help clients with their work. She was patient and kind. Doris's rugs were all original designs inspired by the landscape around her, Nova Scotia's coast, her family, and subjects as far apart as a pixelated television screen and the trip she made to Japan. She rejected commercially printed patterns that were popular during her grandmother's generation and encouraged rug hookers to design their own rugs. She challenged her students to be original. Quote, so many people tell me they can't draw, but they've never tried. We're all artists. Draw, draw, draw. Doris always insisted that her students could and should use their own imaginations to create designs for their rugs. She founded the Square Zebras, a group whose main purpose was to discover and adapt ideas from those who made art in other genres. Rug hooking has a long history in Nova Scotia, but with the advent of accessible commercial floor coverings, it could have become a footnote in the culture of this province. Doris almost single-handedly saved the tradition of rug hooking and gave it new life as art. Thanks to Doris, hooked rugs are no longer utilitarian. They are works of art to be hung on walls of homes and to be exhibited on the walls of galleries. Her book, A Lifetime of Rug Hooking, celebrates her 50 years of hooking rugs. It displays full-color images of over 80 of Doris's rugs. One of the first rugs in the book is a tribute to her grandmother, Paish, who died in 1953. A gray-haired woman stands in the center facing the viewer. She's feeding a flock of chickens while a black cat nuzzles her shin. A clothesline with laundry drying under a blue sky is strung between two trees in the background. An apple tree laden with fruit nearly obscures the farmhouse, and that rug is right over there. Another, A Gift from the Sea, shows a young boy closely examining a snail shell he found on Crescent Beach. The boy is framed by a very large image of the same shell he's holding. The fantastical shell suggests the boy's imagination and reminds us of the excitement and joy children experience in discovering treasures hidden up by the sea. Almost all of Doris's rugs are hooked out of recycled clothing. Doris and her girls, girl's cap right over there. Doris and her girls often went on day-long tours to Frenchy stores around the province looking for wool coats, skirts, and dresses. When they told the cashier the clothing was for hooked rugs, they got a deal on the price. As soon as Doris got home, she turned the bags of wool over to Ron. It was his job to cut and rip the clothing into manageable pieces and put them through the washing machine. Doris was asthmatic and allergic to the dust in secondhand clothing. With the wool sorted, some of it dyed, and all of it cut into strips, Doris sketched her ideas on a piece of linen, stretched over a frame, and went to work creating her images. Doris has been recognized by many as a true innovator in the arts. The late Mary Sparling, director of the Art Gallery of Mount St. Vincent University, said of Doris, "The state of the art of rug hooking in Nova Scotia in the maritime region and along the eastern seaboard owes much to this quiet-spoken, modest, determined, and enterprising woman." Premier Noel Dexter, presented her with a certificate of recognition, which said, among other things, "You are indeed a pioneer in keeping the art of rug hooking alive in Nova Scotia." Pauline Hackman, who writes for the Rug Hooking magazine, it's a U.S. publication, said Doris Eaton is widely regarded as a preeminent wool hooking artist in Nova Scotia and the standard bearer for generations of fiber artists to come. She's considered a cultural treasure of Canada's Maritimes. Deanne Fitzpatrick, who runs a very successful rug hooking store, says, "It is clear that Doris has added beauty to the world. She has helped define and shape contemporary culture in Atlantic Canada, making for us a place where handwork and artwork can mean the same thing." Doris and Ron Eaton always lived modestly. There was a small farm in the Annapolis Valley. When they moved to the South Shore, Ron worked at a building supply store, and later the two ran a bed and breakfast at their home in Petite Riviere. For a short time, Doris had a small rug hooking supply shop, the Hookery, but grew frustrated with the paperwork and other distractions that running a business entails. After she relinquished the shop, Doris sold her rugs from her home. She charged a fair price, but artistic integrity always came first. Together, Doris and Ron pieced together an income that allowed Doris to explore, invent, and express her art. From the moment she defied the traditional role of women of the time by establishing My Wednesday, she carved out a life dedicated to making fine art and, just as importantly, sharing that art with others. It is no exaggeration to say that her single-minded dedication to the art of rug hooking made an extraordinary contribution to the culture of Nova Scotia. I obviously wrote this before she died. Doris will be 91 on July 31st of this year. Just a few years ago, she stopped hooking, and with typical Doris Eaton selflessness, gave her remaining wool and rugs to friends and relatives. She resides in a nursing home now. There is a small piece of hooking on her bedside table, left there by her daughter, Mary Vaughn, quote, "just in case she'd like to do a little hooking." Doris hasn't touched it. She seems very content with her life, a life well lived. That was my submission, but I want to relay a little anecdote. After her daughter, Mary Vaughn, read to Doris what I just read to you, she gave Doris a packet that I prepared with all the elements of my submission. This essay, a list of Doris's honors and exhibitions, photographs of her rugs, glowing letters from a number of people who supported her nomination, and so on. Doris showed that packet to her friends at Wolfville Elms, the home she was living in during her last years. She told them that the packet was confirmation that she had not only been nominated, but that she had been inducted into the Order of Nova Scotia. She was proud of the honor. Her belief that she had been inducted into the Order of Nova Scotia was a result of the mild dementia she suffered at the end of her life. that dementia served her well. When Doris died, she was a member of the Order of Nova Scotia, even if the adjudicators didn't believe that this amazing woman deserved it.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. It was very enlightening. And now we have a lady who's written a song about Doris Eaton, Alex Hickey, and she is going to perform that for us.
I think that my voice is probably big enough to fill this room without the microphone.
Do you mind? Sorry.
At least when I'm singing, but maybe when I'm speaking, I will be on the mic. I'm very moved by that. Peter, I have to wipe the tears away. They reminded me of so many things about Doris. My mother, Janet Barkhouse, learned to hook from Doris and hooked with her for many years. And when I moved back home in 2010, I had the wonderful opportunity to meet Doris, to play cards with her and Ron, and to talk with her. And I was invited to sing at a launch of a rug hooking show she was having in PEI. And Mom and I drove to PEI together, and in honor of that occasion, I wrote a song to play and sing for her. So I'm going to sing that for you all now. I think everybody can see me. You can all see me now? And hear me? I think maybe I'll come right to this corner.
It's fine.
Be all you can in your time, in your place. Just to give all you have of your knowledge and grace. And each one you guide as they go on their way. Will carry you forward into a new day. And each loop and each line has a story to tell. Of a labor of love and a life lived well. We might see ocean or seaweed or shell, but there's so much more to this story. Well, it's a woman who knew that her art was her life. She carved out the time as a mother and wife. Each Wednesday she took to do what her muse asked, and brought forth the visions with which she'd been tasked. And each loop and each line has a story to tell of a labor of love and a life lived well. And we might see ocean or seaweed or shell, but there's so much more to this story. For when she turned to teach, every student inspired, and every spark coaxed into bright fire. A whole world of artists with something to say, with heart and with purpose, each in their own way. If I had 3 lifetimes, I'd give them to you. 'Cause I'd want to see all the work you would do. And you'd want to see how the colors would flow. If every idea had time to grow. And each loop and each line has a story to tell, of a labor of love and a give all you have of your knowledge and grace.
Thank you very much, that was lovely. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming and enjoying the exhibit, and it was a pleasure to do this for Doris. Thank you.